Marcus Chen was 12 years old, and he had never been special in any way that mattered. He sat in the back row of his xenobiology class at the Galactic Integration Academy on Station Prometheus 7, where human children studied alongside the children of a dozen alien species from across the galaxy. His parents worked in the hydroponics section of the station, growing vegetables and maintaining the air recycling systems. And Marcus had always assumed he would do something similar when he grew up. He was average in every subject, and he had no special talents, and he was perfectly fine with that because being average meant being invisible, and being invisible meant being safe. The classroom was filled with students of all shapes and sizes. There were the Velthari with their 4 arms and purple skin, who came from a warrior civilization that had conquered half a sector before joining the Galactic Council. There were the Mindari, who communicated through telepathy and looked down on species that still used their mouths to speak. There were the Crystalborn, who were made of living mineral and could survive in the vacuum of space without any protection. And then there were the humans, soft and small and unremarkable humans who had only joined the galactic community 200 years ago, and who were still considered the newest and weakest members of civilized space. Professor Vex, a tall Mindari with silver skin and 3 eyes, was demonstrating bioluminescent organisms from the ocean world of Nexus Prime. The tiny creatures glowed blue and green in their tank, and the whole class watched as the professor explained how these simple life forms had evolved to create light from chemical reactions inside their bodies. Every species in the galaxy has developed some form of natural advantage, Professor Vex said, his telepathic voice echoing in everyone's minds. The Velthari have their strength and their 4 arms. The Mindari have telepathy. The Crystalborn can reshape their bodies at will. And even these simple organisms have their light. A Velthari student named Crix raised one of his 4 hands, and his mandibles clicked together in what Marcus had learned was a sign of amusement. What about the humans, Professor? Crix asked, and his voice was loud enough for the whole class to hear. What natural advantages do they have? The class grew quiet, and Marcus felt his face grow warm as dozens of alien eyes turned to look at him and the other 3 human students in the room. Professor Vex paused for a moment before answering. Humans are remarkable for their adaptability and their endurance, the professor said. They can survive in a wider range of temperatures than most species, and they can recover from injuries that would kill other beings. Crix made a clicking sound that was definitely laughter. So their special power is that they are hard to kill? He said. That is not a power. That is what prey animals develop so they can run away from predators. Humans are the galaxy's charity case. They have no claws, no venom, no telepathy, no natural weapons of any kind. They are just soft and useless meat that the council felt sorry for. Some of the other students laughed, and Marcus gripped the edge of his desk so hard that his knuckles turned white. He had heard these insults before, because every human on the station had heard them at some point. But something about today was different. Something about the way Crix was looking at him made Marcus feel a burning sensation in his chest that he had never felt before. That is enough, Crix, Professor Vex said, but the Velthari student was not finished. My father says that humans will never amount to anything. Crix continued, and he was looking directly at Marcus now. He says they should have been left on their little planet to destroy themselves, like they were doing before first contact. He says Marcus did not hear what else Crix's father said. The burning sensation in his chest had grown stronger, and it was spreading up through his throat and to his mouth, and he could not breathe. And he could not think, and he could not do anything except open his mouth and let it out. Fire came out of Marcus Chen, not a spark or a puff of smoke, but real fire, white-hot and impossibly bright, that shot across the classroom and hit the ceiling above Crix's head. The flames melted the demonstration tank and sent boiling water and bioluminescent creatures spilling across the floor. Students screamed and dove under their desks, and Professor Vex threw up a telekinetic barrier to protect the class from the spray of molten metal that was falling from the ceiling. And Marcus just stood there with his mouth open and fire still pouring out of him like a river that had broken through a dam. He could feel the heat, but it did not hurt him, and he could see the flames, but he could not stop them, and all he could think was that this was impossible, because humans could not breathe fire because no one could breathe fire because fire did not work that way. Then everything went dark, and Marcus felt himself falling. When he woke up, he was in the medical bay, and his parents were sitting beside his bed with faces that were pale and frightened. His mother was holding his hand, and his father was standing with his arms crossed, and neither of them would meet his eyes. "What happened?" Marcus asked, and his voice was rough like he had been screaming for hours. "You do not remember?" His mother asked. Marcus remembered fire and heat and the look of terror on Crix's face, and then nothing. "I remember," he said, "but I do not understand." His father finally looked at him, and Marcus saw something in his eyes that he had never seen before. It was fear. "Neither do we, son," his father said. "Neither does anyone." Marcus turned his head and looked through the observation window beside his bed, and what he saw made his heart stop. 3 ships hung in space outside the station. But they were not like any ships Marcus had ever seen. They were made of scales and bone and living tissue, and they glowed with an inner fire that made them look like dragons carved from the heart of a star. Each ship was larger than the entire station, and they had appeared from nowhere, and they were just hanging there in the void, waiting. "What are those?" Marcus whispered. His mother's hand tightened on his, and her voice shook when she answered. "They are the Drakkar," she said. "They have not been seen in this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they say they have come for you." Marcus stared at the dragon ships and felt the fire still burning in his chest. Quieter now, but not gone, never gone. And he understood that his life as an average and invisible human boy was over forever. The Drakkar were legends that every species in the galaxy knew. They were the oldest stories, the ones that parents told their children to explain why some stars burned brighter than others, and why some worlds were nothing but ash and glasstan. 1,000 years ago, the Drakkar had ruled a quarter of the galaxy, and they had been called world burners and star shapers, and the closest thing the universe had to gods. Then they had withdrawn into the deep void beyond map space, and no one had seen them since until now. Marcus stood behind his parents in the main docking bay of Station Prometheus 7 and watched as the airlock doors opened to reveal the Drakkar emissary. She was 12 feet tall, and her body was covered in scales that looked like hammered bronze that had been heated until it glowed. Her eyes were the color of dying suns, red and orange and yellow all swirling together, and when she moved the air around her shimmered with heat. Behind her stood 2 guards who were even larger, and their scales were black like volcanic rock, and fire leaked from the joints in their armor. The emissary walked forward, and every step she took left scorch marks on the metal floor. Station security raised their weapons, but the station commander, a human woman named Admiral Chun, who was no relation to Marcus despite sharing his name, waved them down. "I am Sovereign Vessera of the Third Flame," the emissary said, and her voice was like the crackling of a bonfire. "I speak for the Drakkar Conclave, and I have come to claim what is ours." Admiral Chun stepped forward, and Marcus could see that she was afraid, but she did not show it in her voice. "This is a Galactic Council station," the Admiral said. "You have no authority here, and you cannot simply take one of our citizens." Vexera turned her burning eyes toward Marcus, and he felt the fire in his chest respond to her gaze, growing warmer and brighter, like it was reaching toward her. "The boy carries the breath," Vexera said. "He is Drakkar touched, and he belongs with us." The docking bay erupted into chaos. Representatives from a dozen species started shouting, and pointing and making threats, and Marcus heard the Velthri ambassador demanding that the Drakkar leave immediately, and the Mindari representative suggesting that Marcus should be studied for the good of all species and the human delegation, insisting that Marcus was a citizen of Earth and could not be taken anywhere. Against his will through it all, Vexera stood perfectly still and watched Marcus with those burning eyes. Finally, she raised one hand and fire erupted from her palm, shooting up toward the ceiling in a column of white flame that made everyone fall silent. "Listen to me," Vexera said. "I did not come here to negotiate or to argue. I came to explain." She lowered her hand and the fire died, but the air was still hot and heavy. 10 million years ago, the Drakkar were dying, Vexera continued. Our numbers had fallen and our fire was growing cold. So we seeded the galaxy with fragments of our essence. Tiny pieces of Drakkar fire hidden in the genetic code of developing species. She looked around the room at all the different aliens watching her. We planted these seeds in thousands of species on thousands of worlds, she said. And we waited to see if any would bloom. Marcus felt his mother's hand grip his shoulder. Most fragments remain dormant forever, Vexera said. They were passed down from generation to generation without ever awakening. But occasionally, once in 100 million years, a carrier would awaken and the Drakkar breath would come alive inside them. She pointed at Marcus. Your son is the first to awaken in 300,000 years, she said to his parents. The fire inside him is real, and it is growing, and if he does not learn to control it, it will consume him from within. Marcus felt cold despite the heat in the room. What do you mean, consume him? His father demanded. The breath is not meant for human bodies, Vexera said. It is too powerful and too hot, and without proper training, it will burn through him like fire through paper. He has perhaps 6 months before that happens. His mother made a small sound of grief and pulled Marcus closer to her. Then teach him, she said. Teach him to control it, and then let him come home. Vexera shook her head slowly. The training takes decades, she said, and it must be done in the deep void where the fires burn hottest. Your son must come with us, and he must become Drakkar. There is no other way. No, his father said. Absolutely not. He is our son. He's 12 years old. You cannot just take him. Marcus looked at his parents, and he saw how much they loved him and how afraid they were, and he wanted to tell them that everything would be okay, but he could feel the fire inside him getting stronger with every passing minute, and he could feel it pushing against his control like a living thing trying to break free, and he was not sure that anything would ever be okay again. The Galactic Council will not allow this, Admiral Chun said. The Drakkar abandoned their responsibilities to the galaxy 10,000 years ago, and you cannot simply return and start making demands. Vexera turned to face the Admiral, and there was something almost like sadness in her burning eyes. We did not abandon our responsibilities, she said. We withdrew because our fire had grown too hot, and we were burning everything we touched. We left to protect the galaxy from ourselves. She looked back at Marcus. But we always knew we would return one day, she said. We always knew that eventually one of our seeds would bloom, and we would have to come back to collect what was ours. Marcus stepped forward before anyone could stop him. What if I do not want to go? He asked, and his voice shook, but he forced himself to keep talking. What if I want to stay human? Vexera knelt down so that her face was level with his, and this. Close Marcus could see that her scales were not solid bronze, but were instead covered in tiny patterns that looked like flames frozen in metal. Then you will die, she said simply. The breath cannot be removed once it awakens. It can only be controlled, or it will control you, and then it will destroy you. She reached out and placed one burning hand against his chest, and Marcus gasped as he felt the fire inside him respond, surging up to meet her touch like a child reaching for its mother. You feel it, do you not? Vexera asked. The fire is already changing you, already making you into something more than human. You can't stop it any more than you can stop your own heartbeat. Marcus looked into her burning eyes, and he knew that she was telling the truth. The fire inside him was growing, and it was hungry, and it wanted to burn it. He was terrified of what would happen when it finally broke free. The compromise was reached after 3 days of negotiations that nearly led to war. Twice, Sovereign Vexera would be allowed to remain on station. Prometheus 7 for 1 lunar cycle to train Marcus in basic control of the breath. At the end of that time, Marcus would be given a choice. He could choose to go with the Drakkar to the deep void and complete his training and become one of them forever, or he could choose to remain human, and the Drakkar would use their ancient techniques to suppress his fire and lock it away inside him, where it could never awaken again. Either way, his life would never be the same. The training began the next morning in an empty cargo bay that had been reinforced with heat-resistant materials and surrounded by fire suppression systems. Vexera stood in the center of the room with her arms crossed and her burning eyes fixed on Marcus. The breath is not simply fire, she said. It is creation energy, the fundamental force that the Drakkar used to ignite stars and forge worlds out of cosmic dust. It is the power that built the galaxy. Marcus stood across from her and tried to feel the fire inside him, but it was quiet now, hidden somewhere deep in his chest. I do not feel anything, he said. Vexera made a sound that might have been a laugh. You feel it, she said. You are simply afraid of it. The fire knows your fear, and it waits because it is patient. But it will not wait forever. She held up one hand and a small flame appeared in her palm, dancing and flickering like a candle. The first lesson is to call the fire, she said, to reach inside yourself and find the place where it burns and to bring it forth without fear. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to focus. He could feel his heartbeat in his breath and the sweat on his palms, but he could not feel the fire. You are thinking too much, Vexera said. The fire is not in your mind, it is in your soul. Stop thinking and start feeling. Marcus tried again. He remembered the moment in the classroom when the fire had first come out, the burning sensation in his chest that had spread up through his throat and into his mouth. He remembered the anger he had felt at Crix's words and the shame of being called soft and useless and weak. And then he felt it, a tiny spark of heat buried deep inside him like an ember waiting to be fanned into flame. He reached for it and it reached back, and suddenly fire erupted from both of his hands, shooting toward the ceiling in twin columns of white flame. Vexera raised her own hands and caught the fire, absorbing it into herself like water soaking into sand. Good, she said, but you must learn to control the amount. You released everything at once, and that will kill you if you do it too many times. Days passed, and Marcus trained every morning and every afternoon, and sometimes late into the night. He learned to call the fire and to hold it and to release it in controlled bursts rather than explosive torrents. He learned to shape it into different forms, spheres and streams and shields of living flame. He learned that the breath could do more than destroy, that it could also create light and warmth, and that the Drakkar had once used it to bring life to frozen worlds. But as Marcus learned, he also noticed something strange. The techniques that Vexera taught him were old and rigid, following patterns that had been established millions of years ago and had never changed. When Marcus tried them, they worked, but they felt wrong, like wearing shoes that did not quite fit. So he started to experiment. Instead of channeling the fire outward like Vexera taught him, Marcus tried turning it inward. He let the heat flow through his body, warming his muscles and sharpening his senses and making him faster and stronger than any human had ever been. When Vexera saw what he was doing, her burning eyes went wide with something that looked almost like fear. That is not how the breath works, she said. You must release the fire, not hold it inside you. If you keep it within you, it will burn you from the inside out. But Marcus did not feel like he was burning. He felt like he was becoming more alive than he had ever been. Maybe it does not work this way for you, he said. But I am not Drakkar, I am human. And humans adapt. Over the following weeks, Marcus continued to push the boundaries of what Vexera said was possible. He learned to use the fire to heal small cuts and bruises, letting the heat seal. Wounds closed like a cauterizing flame. He learned to see heat itself, perceiving the thermal signatures of everyone around him, even through walls and floors. He learned to create fire that did not burn living things, flames that could melt metal but pass through flesh without leaving a mark. Each new discovery disturbed Vexera more than the last. This is impossible, she said one evening after Marcus demonstrated a technique that allowed him to absorb fire from external sources and add it to his own power. The breath has existed for 10 million years, and no one has ever done what you are doing, Marcus shrugged. Humans have only existed for a few 100,000 years, he said, but we have already changed more than any other species in the galaxy. We went from caves to starships in less time than it takes a Drakkar to finish one training cycle. Vexera stared at him with her burning eyes, and Marcus could see that she was truly afraid of him now. Not afraid of the fire inside him, but afraid of what he was becoming. Meanwhile, outside the training room, the galaxy was moving toward war. The Velthari Empire had declared that Marcus was too dangerous to be allowed to exist, and they were mobilizing warships to come and capture or kill him. Other species were taking sides, with some supporting the Velthari and others supporting Earth, and the Galactic Council was fracturing along lines that had been invisible just weeks ago, all because of one 12-year-old human boy who had breathed fire in a classroom. Marcus watched the news reports, and he felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had never wanted any of this. He had just wanted to be average and invisible and safe. But the fire inside him did not care what he wanted, and the galaxy did not care what he wanted, and he was starting to realize that sometimes you did not get to choose your destiny. Sometimes your destiny chose you. The lunar cycle ended on a Tuesday, and Marcus stood in the station's council chamber, with his parents behind him and Vexera in front of him and representatives from every major species watching from the gallery above. The time has come to choose, Vexera said. Will you come with us to the deep void and become Drakkar? Or will you remain human and let us seal the fire away? Marcus had thought about this moment every night for the past month. He had imagined choosing to go with the Drakkar and leaving his parents and his world and everything he knew behind. He had imagined choosing to stay and feeling the fire locked away inside him, never to burn again, but standing here now with everyone watching him. Marcus realized that neither choice felt right. I choose neither, he said. The chamber erupted into confused murmurs, and Vexera's burning eyes narrowed. That is not an option, she said. You must choose one or the other. Why? Marcus asked. Why are those the only two choices? Vexera stepped closer to him, and the heat radiating from her body made the air shimmer. Because those are the only two ways to survive, she said. Either you become Drakkar and learn to live with the fire, or you give up the fire and remain human. There is no middle path. Marcus shook his head. That is what you believe, because that is all you have ever known, he said. But I am not like you. I am human, and humans do not accept limits. We break them. He turned to face the gallery where hundreds of alien representatives were watching. Everyone in this room thinks they know what humans are, Marcus said. They think we are soft and weak and useless. They think we are the galaxy's charity case. A species with no natural advantages that got lucky enough to be discovered before we destroyed ourselves. He could feel the fire rising in his chest, and he let it come. Let it spread through his body until his skin began to glow with inner heat. But they are wrong, Marcus continued. Humans do not have claws because we made knives. We do not have venom because we made medicine. We do not have telepathy because we made language and writing and computers. We were never given anything, and that is exactly why we are strong. He turned back to Vexera. You want me to abandon my humanity to control this power, he said. But my humanity is what lets me use it in ways you never imagined. He held up his hands, and fire bloomed from his palms. But it was not the white-hot destructive flame that he had first. Released in the classroom, it was warm and golden, and it flickered gently like a campfire on a cold night. This is fire that heals, Marcus said. I created it myself using techniques that no Drakkar has ever used. He changed the shape of the flames, letting them flow around his body like a second skin. This is fire that protects, he said. It can stop a plasma bolt, but it will not burn anyone who touches me. Finally, he let the fire die down until only his eyes still glowed with inner light. I am not going to become Drakkar, Marcus said. And I am not going to seal my fire away. I am going to be something new, something that has never existed before. I am going to be human and Drakkar at the same time. Vexera stared at him in silence for a long moment. That is impossible, she finally said. The Drakkar have existed for 10 million years. We know everything there is to know about the breath. And what you are suggesting cannot be done. Maybe it cannot be done by Drakkar, Marcus said. But I am not Drakkar. I am human, and we have a saying on Earth. We say that the impossible just takes a little longer. He stepped toward Vexera, and even though she was 12 feet tall and wreathed in flame, she took a step back. You have been burning for 10,000 years, Marcus said. You withdrew from the galaxy because your fire was too hot and you were destroying everything you touched. But you forgot what fire is actually for. He raised one hand and created a small flame that danced on his palm. Fire is not just destruction, he said. Fire is what let humans survive the ice ages. Fire is what let us cook food and purify water and see in the dark. Fire is what let us forge metal and build cities and reach the stars. Humans did not just survive fire. We made it work for us. Vexera looked at the small flame in his hand, and Marcus could see something changing in her burning eyes. You took the most destructive force in the universe, and you used it to create civilization, she said slowly. You turned a weapon into a tool. That is what humans do, Marcus said. We take what the universe gives us, and we make it better. We adapt, we evolve, we change, and we never stop. For the first time in recorded history, a Drakkar sovereign was speechless. The chamber was completely silent as Vexera stood there staring at this 12-year-old human boy who had just told the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy that they were doing it wrong. Finally, she spoke. You truly believe you can walk this middle path? She asked. You truly believe you can be both human and Drakkar? I do not just believe it, Marcus said. I am already doing it. Vexera was quiet for another long moment, and then she did something that made everyone in the chamber gasp. She bowed. Then perhaps, she said, it is time for the Drakkar to learn something new. A Velthari fleet arrived 3 days later. 40 warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their weapons already powered, and their shields already raised. The fleet commander was a Velthari admiral named Kraxus, who had won 17 major battles and who had never lost a single engagement in his entire career. He broadcast his demands on every frequency, by order of the Velthari Empire and with the support of the Allied Systems Coalition. We are here to take custody of the human designated Marcus Chen, Kraxus announced. This individual has been deemed a threat to galactic security and must be contained. Any attempt to resist will be met with overwhelming force. Station Prometheus 7 had no warships. It had some defensive systems and a small security force, but nothing that could stand against 40 Velthari battlecruisers. The Galactic Council sent urgent messages demanding that the Valkyrie stand down, but Craxus ignored them. The Drakkar ships were still in orbit, but Vexra had made it clear that she would not fight to protect the human who had refused to become Drakkar. Marcus stood in the observation deck and watched the Valkyrie fleet growing larger as it approached. His parents were beside him, and his mother was crying, and his father was holding her and telling her that everything would be okay, even though they all knew it was not true. "I have to go out there," Marcus said. His father grabbed his arm. "No," he said. "Absolutely not. You are 12 years old. You cannot fight a fleet of warships." "I do not want to fight them," Marcus said. "I just want to talk to them." He gently pulled his arm free and walked toward the airlock. Vexra was waiting there with her burning eyes fixed on him. "This is foolish," she said. "Even with the breath, you cannot survive in the vacuum of space. And even if you could, you cannot stop 40 warships. Can you survive in space?" Marcus asked. Vexra nodded slowly. "The breath sustains us," she said. "We do not need air or warmth. We carry our own fire." "Then I can do it too," Marcus said. "I just have to adapt." He stepped into the airlock before anyone could stop him, and he closed his eyes and felt for the fire inside him. It was there waiting for him, stronger than ever, burning with a heat that should have consumed him, but instead made him feel more alive than he had ever felt. He let the fire spread through every part of his body, filling his lungs and his blood and his bones until he was more flame than flesh. Then he opened the outer airlock door and stepped into space. The cold hit him first, but the fire pushed it back. The vacuum tried to tear the air from his lungs, but there was no air left. Only fire. He floated in the void between the station and the Valkyrie fleet, and he burned like a star. His body was wrapped in a corona of white flame that stretched out behind him like wings, and his eyes blazed with the light of creation itself. He hung there in the darkness, and he was not afraid. Admiral Craxus saw him and laughed. "Is this your defense?" he broadcast. "One human child?" "The Valkyrie Empire is not impressed." Marcus spoke, and his voice carried across every frequency in the system, broadcast by the fire itself. "I am not a defense," he said. "I am not a weapon. I am not a threat. I am just a 12-year-old kid from Earth who wanted to pass his xenobiology exam." The Valkyrie fleet continued to advance. "But if you attack this station," Marcus continued, "if you threaten my family and my friends and my home, then I will show you exactly what humans do when someone threatens the people we love." Craxus laughed again. "Fire." He ordered 40 warships. "Open fire at once. Plasma bolts and nuclear warheads and antimatter torpedoes streaked toward Marcus in a wall of destruction that could have cracked the planet in half, and Marcus spread his arms wide and caught them. Every weapon, every bolt, every bomb flowed into him like rivers flowing into an ocean. He absorbed the plasma and the nuclear fire and the antimatter explosions, and he added their energy to his own. The fleet fired again and again, and Marcus just hung there burning brighter with each impact until he shone like a second sun. Ships across the system had to dim their view screens because he was too bright to look at directly. Finally, the Valkyrie weapons fell silent because they had nothing left to fire. Marcus floated in the void surrounded by a halo of stolen energy, and he spoke again in a voice that was gentle and sad. "Are you done?" he asked. Admiral Craxus did not respond. "I am not going to hurt you," Marcus said. "I am not going to destroy your ships or kill your crews. That is not what fire is for. Fire is for warmth and light and creation. Fire is for protecting the people you love." He let some of the energy he had absorbed flow out of him in a wave of golden light that washed over the Valkyrie fleet. It did not damage the ships, but every sensor on every vessel detected what it was: pure creation energy. The same force that ignited stars and built worlds. Enough power to reshape a solar system if it was released all at once. I could end this fleet with a thought, Marcus said. But I will not, because that is not who I am. I am human. And humans believe that every problem has a solution that does not require destruction. He floated closer to the flagship until he was right outside the bridge windows where Admiral Craxus could see him clearly. Go home. Marcus said, tell your empire that the human boy is not a threat. Tell them that he just wants to live in peace. Tell them that if they come back with more ships, I will still be here, and I will still refuse to destroy them. Because that is what it means to be human. The Valkyrie fleet hung in space for a long moment. Then slowly, one by one, the ships began. To turn away, Admiral Craxus was the last to leave. And as his flagship jumped to hyperspace, Marcus could see him staring through the bridge window with an expression of complete bewilderment. He had come to capture or kill a threat to galactic security. Instead, he had found a 12-year-old boy who could have destroyed his entire fleet, but chose not to. Marcus floated back to the station, and the fire slowly dimmed until he was just a boy again, tired and hungry, and desperately wanting to hug his parents. They were waiting for him in the airlock, and his mother grabbed him so hard he thought she might break his ribs, and his father just stood there with tears streaming down his face. You stupid, brave, wonderful boy, his mother whispered. Do not ever do that again. Marcus hugged her back. I will try, he said, but I cannot make any promises. 1 year later, the Galactic Integration Academy had a new course called Human Adaptation Studies, and Marcus Chung was one of the teachers. Even though he was only 13, the Drakkar delegation had set up a permanent embassy on Station Prometheus 7, and Vexera came to Marcus's classes sometimes to learn how humans thought about fire and change and growth. She was still learning, and she said she would probably be learning for another 1,000 years, but she did not seem to mind. Other humans had begun awakening across the galaxy, their dormant Drakkar essence responding to the story of the boy who had refused to choose between destruction and surrender. Marcus trained them when he could and taught them what he had learned, and told them that they did not have to be Drakkar or human. They could be both. They could be something new and throughout the galaxy. Species that had once dismissed humanity as soft and useless were starting to wonder what else they had been wrong about. What other impossible things would the humans do next? The answer, Marcus knew, was everything, because that was what humans did. They looked at the impossible, and they said not yet, and then they got to work.